NBC News, Washington.
You want us to move closer when we do? Are you going to do?
Virginia's junior senator Mark Warner just spent part of his morning at the wastewater treatment plant in Hopewell, the facility trying an experimental process of removing the chemical elements of algae and then turning it into a biofuel. The senator joins us now live on First at 4 to discuss his work in Washington. Let's first talk about this project that you were working on today in Hopewell. This was a pretty big stimulus grant, $650,000. Is this an example of how the stimulus plan is working?
Well, this is one that's a little more experimental. It's both the benefit of creating green fuel from the algae and actually decreasing the nitrogen runoff into the Chesapeake Bay. So, you know, it is experimental. We've got to get a year's worth of data. But if we could make Hopewell, which had been the chemical capital of Virginia in the 20th century, the leader in the 21st century in green energy, that's a win-win. And I think, as your earlier report showed, that housing sales are up a little bit. I don't want to say we're out of the woods, but if you would look a year ago when the Dow was at 7,000 and we were losing 700,000 jobs a month, we are seeing some recovery coming.
So when you look back on the amount of money invested in the stimulus plan, do you think it was a wise investment?
You know, Ryan, I think both the TARP plan that was passed under President Bush and the stimulus passed under President Obama, both of them terribly politically unpopular, right. But I think they both helped avoid what would have been an even worse economic catastrophe.
Let's talk more about the economy. You're obviously doing a lot of work on financial reform on Wall Street as well. Yeah. It seems that everybody is upset with what's going on Wall Street. Nobody can really explain what the problem is. As simply as you can, explain what you're trying to do to fix what's going on.
Well, Ryan, there's three things we're trying to do. One, in taxpayer bailout. Never again should taxpayers have to fund a big financial institution. We ought to let them fail. If they get into trouble, they ought to go out of business. The shareholders ought to be toast. The management ought to be fired. And we put a process in place to do that. Two, we've got to make sure that there's more transparency around some of these financial instruments, the derivatives and some of these other contracts, and we're trying to bring that to the table. And three, we've got to make sure that there's actually some consumer protection rules in place for all kinds of financial products out there so that the public actually knows what they're buying, and you know, we actually restart the kind of basic notions that we shouldn't be borrowing money to buy a house if you can't pay it back. So we think we can get that. We also think we can get a bipartisan bill.
That's my next question. Obviously, bipartisanship has been very difficult to come by in Washington. Can you get at least one Republican on board?
Listen, I think at the end of the day, this will be broadly bipartisan. I mean, Senator Corker, a Republican senator from Tennessee, and I have been working literally kind of behind the scenes and somewhat now more publicly over the last year to try to get it right. 18 months after the financial meltdown, we ought to find common ground around this issue and get it fixed.
You are a moderate. You've worked with Republicans across your entire career. There just seems to be a real lack of bipartisanship when it comes to any issue in Washington. Is that frustrating you?
Frustrates the heck out of me. There are days I go, you know, this is crazy. There are days I long for the General Assembly in Richmond. They look rational compared to some of the stuff that goes on in Washington. But, you know, you got to keep at it. There's some stuff that goes on below the headlines. Corker and I working on financial re-reg. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, working on energy with some Democrats. So we got to get back to that because the problems are too big.
Now, let's talk about the revenue problem that there seems to be in Washington. It seems that there's plenty of things to spend money on, but not nearly enough money to come in. Republicans, really the American public seems resistant to any kind of increase in taxes. One of the ideas being floated out there is this value-added tax. Do you think there's any merit to this idea at all?
You know, Ryan, I don't think you're going to see the value-added tax layered on. I mean, I think actually former Fed Chair Paul Volcker suggested it. It's kind of like a national sales tax. You know, I just don't think it's going to come to pass. I think what you've got to do first is you've got to show you can tighten your belt and cut back on spending. Yesterday, I took some grief because I actually put in place, with bipartisan support, some Democrats whacked me on it, we eliminated 18 programs. You got to start eliminating some of the programs. We only saved $1 billion, but $1 billion here, $1 billion there. We're starting down that process. We also have to put, you know, one of the things that was most disappointing to me so far in this job was we had an effort to create a bipartisan commission to look at everything. Spending, revenues, entitlement program. You know, I came back actually from my mom's funeral to vote on that you could have to vote it up or down. And then unfortunately some of my Republican colleagues who co-sponsored the bill voted against it because it was going to pass. So there's a little bit of hypocrisy on both sides, but we're going to have to get our deficit under control.
Let's talk politics now. Obviously, the Democrats have had a tough run of it, particularly in Virginia, but really nationwide as well. Are you concerned that your party could lose one or both of these houses in these upcoming elections?
You know, the one thing about political prognostication, I'm not very good at it. I don't want to take away your business. You know, I think a couple months back, people still are madder than heck at Congress across the board, and the Democrats were in charge. I think they'll see as this health care bill rolls out, it's not as good or as bad as some of the folks have said. I think we've got to do more around cost containment. I think some of the biggest anger that was felt probably February, March, as the economy recovers, you know, seems to be dissipating a little bit. End of the day, I think people are going to look and say, Democrat or Republican. Are you about getting stuff done, or are you just about partisanship?
Is it possible to get anything done if you get to the point where you already can't get things done with big majorities of Democrats?
I think look at this financial bill. I mean, Corker and I have been working on it for a year. I think we're going to get a bipartisan. We may have a little more bumps in the road beginning of the week, but at the end of the day, I think it'll get passed. We were asked this question the other day, and we both said, hey, we're both new guys. We didn't get the memo that we weren't supposed to get stuff done. So I'm going to keep trying to work across the party line.
All right. Senator Mark Warner, thank you for being here. We'll have to have you back soon.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right. Thank you.